Hello, welcome to Manny Beal. I managed to get a link to through Stefan Molyneux's Telegram channel, a link to his recent his presentation series of the history of philosophers, and not that I'm particularly interested in having a history of philosophers because I don't care too much about other philosophers other than deconstructing the shit, right? um, because philosophy is your personal attempt at getting a grip on what the hell is going on, right? In your experience and how you handle it and what to do about it and so on, right? So basically, I only get inspired by what other philosophers, it might solidify me, it might create some need in me to say, I need to check up on this or something like that, right? It's not like I am, eating at hook, line, and sinker, what other philosophers are. I have, pushed that, attempt away from me, right? Or that potential urge. I don't have much of that urge anymore. But when you're sort of starting out in philosophy, you're like a sponge, sucking philosophy, and you might be eating it more raw than you ought to, right? So as I have, matured as a philosopher, I have become more solidified in my trusting my own and working from my own philosophy because I find it to be quite coherent, right? What I stumbled on was he has apparently, he's gone all the way from, from Confucius and, Socrates and Saint Anselm and, all the way. Now he's around Locke and Spinoza. So what I would like to hear is his take on Hume, because I find Hume to be the big guy in philosophy. He is the one who pointed out various stuff that sort of challenges the whole scientism thing, right? And people have been battling with Hume ever since. Not so much John Locke, although I have a great respect for his attempt at clear thinking and the tabula rasa, starting from afresh and building from there kind of thing. And as Molyneux also pointed out, I listened to a bit of that John Locke thing, that you have to build. I mean, if children are born like blank slates, you should be careful what you actually feed them with, right? Because if they have, if they need to be told how to think, how did those who tell them what to think, how did they get to what they are thinking, right? Did they get it because they were told to, or because they had their own experience of it, right? If they had their own experience, well, then they should look that children have their own experiences. If they were told to, how did they check whether or not it was good enough, right? What tools did they use, right? It always comes back to this parenting stuff. And maybe, John Locke should be recognized for opening up the floodgates of, what does it actually mean to bring up children, right? I don't think that it might have had as big a influence. He might not have had a big influence in this regard as he ought to have had. But nonetheless, he did do things there, right? Open up thinking along the line. Maybe just beating the shit out of your children might not be that smart, right? In the long run. But I have no patience with Christians, for instance, right? Because basically it's a carte blanche to beat your children into submission, right? And look how far that has got us in the 20th century, right? Okay, but he created a. Apparently, he is into series. It's series 1, episode 17. I wonder what series 2 might be. Is that modern philosophers or future? I don't know, right? But episode 17, where he goes on a rant that he loathes his own series on History of Philosophers. Now, he rants about how he thinks that philosophers basically betray humanity by, sticking their head out and saying, hey, I've come up with some fancy thoughts here. And when you check it out, nothing really amounts to anything that is useful in your everyday. And that's also a criticism that I have put forth a lot of times about when I deconstruct all sorts of stuff. It's like there is no really anything to go with, right? That really sort of, okay, this is serious, right? It's all sorts of fluffy words and nothing really tangible, right? And I guess that's a reasonable criticism. I just don't understand why he had to spend 16 chapters telling about philosophers before he got to that point. I mean, if he's Mr. Philosophy and been doing philosophy for 40 years and have a PhD in some kind of philosophy and so on, he would have this already, right? It wouldn't be after 40 years and doing 16 parts of the History of Philosophers. He would finally come to the realization. So this is sort of a planned thing, right? It seems to me, right? Otherwise, there's something is crazy, right? But I would like to comment on it because I find it to be an interesting thing to comment on the history of philosophers and their ability to do whatever it was that they claimed, and maybe reflect on whether or not it actually makes sense what Stefan Molyneux has to say, right?
Honest about my difficulties. And yeah, today, Friday, 14th of October, 2022, at 12.
Oh yeah, before we head into it, I found this on the website rss.com, podcast/history history philosophy, something like that. Let me see if I can find history philosophy / something. Maybe you can search on Freedom, and it's sort of it's premium, but somehow I got access, so I don't know. Maybe it's not it's premium by name, not by access. So I don't know, right? So if I can get to it, I can get to it. So be it. Maybe it's sort of a holiday thing. I don't know. But it's from December 6, 2022, and there's a note here. So the point is, or what he tries to say, get to is why I loathe this series, which is his own series, right? After I finished Blaise Pascal, I felt a near bottomless boredom, rage, and contempt for my entire series on the History of Philosophers. Join me in an epic rant as I work out the source of my anger. In other words, sometimes I do a call-in show with myself. Do not try to don't try to fall asleep to this. Okay, so this is going to be Randy, right? And not Randy in that sense, but Randy in the Stefan Molyneux sense, right? Okay, let's go.
Of 10 p.m., I'm going to be pretty frank about my difficulties. So yesterday, I finished Blaise Pascal in my History of Philosophers series, and that's like 16 or 17 major philosophers over 2,000 years that I have dealt with. And I felt irritation, anger, boredom, and zero desire to continue with the project. Now, that's not particularly like me. I'm fairly good at follow-through and getting things done, but by God, I really did not want to continue with this one. And I couldn't figure out why. Don't know why. I was enjoying it, really enjoying it. Looking forward to it. Loved the recordings, the enthusiasm, the passion, the clarity, the journey. It was great. And then, it really wasn't. And I was trying to sort of figure out, what the hell? This is kind of an unusual thing for me. I don't usually get enraged at projects that I voluntarily...
I started to get sort of second thoughts. What the hell am I doing here? He started sort of self psychoanalyzing here, right? he's sitting in his echo chamber talking to himself. Why am I interested in doing this? And I'm afraid I don't have a good answer why. There's just something about Stefan Molyneux that triggers something in me. I don't know what the fuck it is, but there's just something about him that annoys me. Right? He's so ridiculously bad at philosophy, right? While at the same time, his eloquence in putting words together and so on makes him sound like he's smart, right? It makes him sound like he's sort of decently smart. Or something. He can throw around words in a way that makes it sound to the average listener like this guy is, he's the king of philosophy, right? But basically, he's merely, at most, the one-eyed king of the blind, right? Someone with more than a couple of cells to bring together will immediately see that nothing he really says hangs together. But he is good at throwing these terms around that makes it sound like he knows what he's talking about, right? But if you might want to, if you haven't seen other of my grapplings with Stefan Molyneux, I have deconstructed 3 of his books. Universally Preferable Behavior, The Art of the Argument, and what's it called? Not Principles of Philosophy. Simple Philosophy. I forget what it's called. But there's a third book. I forget the title, but it's something, Basic Philosophy, something like that. I forget the title. I tend to forget these titles. I don't know why. But so you have an idea how crappy his philosophy is, right? It seems to me I can't find any philosophers that I can look up to. And not that I want to look up to, but somebody I can say, wow, that's a fucking cool dude, or girl for that matter, right? But it's usually a dude. That this is coherent, right? I might not agree with the conclusions or the axioms, but at least it's coherent and stable and not sophist in nature. It's not an attempt to throw words at you, and maybe somehow by throwing in this stream of words, some fancy philosophy will pop out of it because now I've used all these fancy words. That's what it seems like to me, right? That basically any philosopher I have come across, it's all about throwing words at you, right? Not being careful using good definitions, not being careful being strict and orderly in starting out with, a good reduction base, then decent metaphysics, clarifying it, like also something you could say meta philosophy, right? Okay, what am I actually doing when I'm doing philosophy? What do I need to do first and second and third, and something like that. I'm not saying I wouldn't necessarily do that if I was writing a book, a treatise on philosophy, but I've done some presentations of, for instance, metaphysics, where I do this structured fashion, do it in this structured, simplified fashion. It's not that I might not be able to throw another word or a couple of hundred words at it, but it's not necessarily necessary. If it's not necessary, I think you shouldn't do it, right? It's more important that people get the point than they get the completeness of it, right? It's better that you get the idea than you get the whole picture, right? If you make a PowerPoint presentation, it shouldn't be more than these 8 slides, with big fonts and a few pictures, right? So that people get the point you're trying to get across, rather than having 75 slides with bunch of text and all sorts of diagrams to make sure that they have the complete picture. But then they lose the important details in this tsunami of a presentation. And I think I've always been very concerned that keep it simple, keep it concise, keep it precise. Don't just, this hot air blower of word salad in my face At some point, it's like, I don't care now, right? I want to be able to get along with it. I want to be able to get on board with it and say, okay, we settle that. I think I can go with that. Then the next one, and then the next one. This sort of fashion, right? And, certainly, absolutely, for sure, Stefan Molyneux is not in that camp. He is in the, let me, open my hot air dryer and blow the word salad in your face, right? For an hour or five, right? Not that there might not be something in there, but it's hard to get at, right? So maybe this is sort of a frustration that nobody takes him seriously, right? He's frustrated that his UPB and all that is not it doesn't have any traction, right? And my deconstruction points out, a smorgasbord of problems in the book, right? I mean, it's that any criticism you could possibly make of this book, which is the most important book, I would say, UPB, right? You can bring to the table because there's nothing about it that is sort of, okay, this is good, right? It's basically everything about it that sucks, in my opinion, right? The language is sophist in nature. It's incoherent. It's badly argued using syllogism, but that it's not a proof of anything as a proof of something, and then he keeps going for 100 pages talking to himself. It's no definitions, and just saying that I don't have to prove that murder is wrong. Statements like that. It's just like it's below amateur, right? It's so badly written and argued that it's a blemish on the idea of philosophy, in my opinion, right? This is the level of badness, and he has no self-criticism apparently. It must be because people are stupid or they don't want to adhere to his perfect, something philosophy. When I deconstruct it, I find only bullshit, right? There is nothing there to work with, right? Okay, please go and check out my deconstructions for further information, right? Let's head in.
Take on that I know are providing great value, that are enjoyable.
Oh, not only you think, of course, because you're Mr. Philosophy, right? There cannot possibly be any criticism or any doubt about how perfect you are, right? It's this megalomania that's just sieving through everything he does.
Useful, powerful, getting great feedback. Thank you, everyone.
Oh, feedback. Okay, when I was on his show, the one time I was on his show discussing metaphysics, he basically yelled at me and then muted me out of the conversation, right? And then he kept talking for 20 minutes, trying to frame me as an idiot, some more or less like that, right? This is the level of philosophy and debating. He is Mr. Art of the Argument, right?
And I felt it just as I finished recording the show yesterday. And I just was like, I'm done with all of this crap. And I couldn't. And next up is John Locke. John Locke is a philosopher I like a lot. He's got a lot of great things to say. My ancestor was great friends with him. He was persecuted.
I like Locke a lot. I like Locke a lot. Yeah. Oh, whatever.
An empiricist, small government guy. I was just like, I don't want to. Why don't I want to? Why wouldn't I want to continue in this project? It's a culmination of a lot of my life's work. Why don't...
Okay, so your life's work, is this the culmination of your life's work? In what sense? Talking about other philosophers, is that a culmination of your work? I don't really understand this. Is he trying to talk it up as if it's some kind of pinnacle of philosophy? I don't know.
Don't I want to do it anymore? So,
Get it out. Get it out, Molly. Come on, you can do it. It reminds me that I also get ranty at certain points in my deconstructions when it's something that is so obviously stupid to me that people push this, right? So it's I understand where it's coming from, right? I can see it, but the problem is his own philosophy, right? His own philosophy sucks, but he's unable to get to it, right? He wrote the book, the not the art of universally preferable behavior sometime back in 2007, I think, right? Thereabout. So it's been 15 years since going on 16 years, right? And it's his version of revision number 1 still. He hasn't changed or modified or improved anything. It's version 1, and this is perfect, apparently, right? Nobody writing the greatest book, the holy grail of philosophy, in one go and then say, perfect, right? It has to be improved. It has to be revised, right? What kind of feedback have you actually got to this book, right? Any? I mean, if you have got feedback, why haven't you made new revisions or addendums or whatever, something that is sort of official, right? Apart from a few videos following some early criticism, but that I always also deconstructed in the ass of deconstructing UPB book, right? The UPB book. But why not go back to that, drawing board and try to come up with something better than UPB, right? Something that is actually some kind of complete treatise on philosophy, from the foundations of metaphysics, very rigid, very structured, all full of definitions and complete picture. Nothing is just thrown in there because of words, right? Something that hangs together and that is obvious why this must follow this moral principle. Something that is actually Stefan Molyneux's final moral principle, rather than just connecting the dots and getting to the non-aggression principle, right? Which is based on, apparently, an objective observation of murder, right? Which is stupid, because you don't even understand that he's violating Hume's Izzard gap, right? So maybe cut the crap, right? Step out of your echo chamber, get some criticism, start from afresh and do some serious philosophy, rather than sitting in your echo chamber and your Bitcoin mansion and thinking you're smart, right? Do something about it.
I think I might know why. You can sort of let me know what you think. And
I just did.
I'll sort of explain it. Now, this is me working it out as I'm going along, because I don't have all the final answers, but this is sort of where I'm...
You don't have all the final answers. So will you get them? Or is it just left? Are you just venting the hot air balloon here, or what is it? Are you going to get somewhere with it? Or is it just, oh, that's nice to get, off my chest. I'm just going back to my Bitcoin mansion and, whatever, right? Yes, rant a bit, but get to some result. Get to some conclusions. Get to something that is useful, right? Sitting there for an hour just, blowing off steam is not really philosophy, is it? Right?
Starting, okay. Philosophers have one job, and that is using reason and evidence to prove morality. It's one job.
One job, using reason and evidence to prove morality. But if you're saying that there is morality, you must already have proven it. Otherwise, you can't use the term morality, right? So what do you need to prove? That there is something called morality? There is a term, right? But if you're proving it, it must be something that you can experience. So can you experience morality? Is it an object? Does it have a color? Does it have a sound? And so on. So it's not empirical. But doesn't it need to be empirical in order to be proved? So you can prove something that is only in your mind? So doesn't this blur the lines between what can be proven and what can't be proven? Or proved? What's the term? Proven? And is reason and evidence, right? Can you reason your way from everything, anything to anything? Or are there limits to reasoning? Like, on Kant's critique of pure reason, that there are limits to what you can reason about. At some point, you need to say, I can't reason any further. I can't get to where I want to go. So what do you do then, right? Is anything reasonable, or can anything be reasoned about? And what do you mean by evidence? Because evidence of an elephant is not an elephant, for instance, right? If I see a sign, go this way to the elephants, that is evidence I could use towards getting to the elephant or elephants. But the sign is not an elephant, right? So the evidence is not the thing I'm going to get at. So you say, yeah, I have evidence of morality. But that doesn't mean you have a morality, that you have evidence, right? Evidence is exactly not that which is evidence towards, right? Otherwise, it would be the thing, or not even be evidence then, right? So you are just, again, you're throwing around words that sounds authoritative, right? But is basically just disconnected from anything, in my opinion, right? You need to be more precise. You need to go back to the drawing board or do some serious stuff in order to get somewhere, right?
That's the job. That's it. That's the thing. That's the whole point.
Yeah, it's the point, but it's not the whole thing. Doing metaphysics is not evidence, right? Because you need to have established epistemology in order to get knowledge, because evidence is a kind of knowledge. It's knowledge of that which is evidence towards that which you want to know, that other thing you want to know, right? I know the sign that says, go this way to the elephant, right? That's knowledge of the sign, but that sign is not the elephant, but it's evidence towards that elephant I want to have knowledge of, right? I'm not necessarily getting to the elephant, because it might be a fake sign, or the elephant is dead or gone or whatever, right? But at least it's some kind of evidence, right? So,
it's the one differentiator. Between philosophy and all other mental disciplines, there's tons of other mental disciplines that use reason and evidence. Physics, reason and
physics? Is that using reason? No. Be careful now, right? You're just, now you're getting angry and shouting at the world, and, what is reasoning, right? What is actual reasoning? If I have an apple in my hand, what I consider an apple, or what I objectify as an apple, reasoning would be, if I eat this apple, or we stick it in my mouth, chew on it, and swallow a piece of it, I might get fed, right? That's a kind of reasoning. But that entails I have an objectification of apple, which is kind of knowledge of apple. So don't I need to have knowledge in order to start reasoning, right? So aren't you blurring the lines between what it means to philosophize and what it means to reason? You can't equate reasoning and philosophy. You need to do philosophy in order to get to an understanding what you mean by reasoning, right? And knowledge and ethics and so on, and morality and moral principles and so on, objectivity, all that, right? So aren't you just roaming around shouting at the clouds here, right? And you're just repeating the same old stupid shit that you have been repeating for 15 years, right? Nothing new under the sun anywhere. And the only thing you can apparently do is shout at the clouds, right? I mean, this is a crazy person sitting in his echo chamber counting his Bitcoin, right? And because he has Bitcoin or whatever, he doesn't need to go to an insane asylum, but he can stay at home, right?
evidence. Biology, reason and evidence. Medicine, reason and evidence. Engineering, reason and evidence. Empiricism, the art of non-contradictory identification of information and verification through the evidence of the senses. Reason and evidence.
The evidence of his senses. Okay, so now that's a kind of metaphysics, right? What do you mean by evidence? If I'm experienced the color blue, is that evidence? How would I know that it's evidence contrary to some other classification, right? If I experience a color, is that evidence? What is it evidence of? Because the color red can mean a lot of things. A lot of objects can be red, right? And when you think about it, all you have are these colors and these sounds and these tastes and so on. But they are not any particular evidence of something. How would I know that it's evidence? Because if I have the experience of the color, I have that experience of the color. If I have some other experience and no experience, is that evidence of not? Is that anti-evidence? Or how should I understand this? You haven't done the rigidity of dealing with these aspects, right? In order to make people who trying to understand your philosophy actually able to get to an understanding, right? It's too fluffy, it's too wordy, it's too sophist in nature. It's not rigid enough, right? You can't just say reason and evidence and then everything is solved, right? They are just words if you're not anchoring it in anything, right? And I would say that what it ultimately must be anchored in is what I call, and other people call that, but I call it a reduction base, to stay with, something that is illuminating or alluding somewhat to a scientific approach. But you can't use science in philosophy, right? Because you need to do philosophy to do science. But I think a reduction base is a good thing because it also, reminds me of Descartes and so on, right? So, in a lack of a better term, a reduction base. That's the foundation. That is this, the string theory of your philosophy, right? You can't go any deeper than your reduction base. And if you can, then that will be your reduction base then, right? And in my opinion, it's the qualia of your sense qualia, you could say, right? Your taste, your sound, your smells, and your colors and so on, right? This is the reduction base. And you might find something fine, find some other reduction base, but at least have a reduction base, so whenever you use any kind of term in your treatise of philosophy, I can trace that term back to the reduction base and understand what is meant by that term. Otherwise, you are just throwing around words in order to convince me of whatever confirmation bias you already have, or at least I should consider that, right?
Nutrition, exercise, you name it. It's reason and evidence. Building sewage plants, nuclear reactors, reason and evidence. Now, what those disciplines don't have is morality. Science is amoral. Build a bomb, build an MRI. Science doesn't care in any foundational way. Science not moral.
Science can't care. Science is a principle, right? That people are adhering to. So it's not science that does anything. I just want to clarify that. Just make sure that science is not considered something that's just floating in air somewhere, right? It's a principle that people follow, which is actually a rejection of religion or any kind of mysticism, right? If you want to get somewhere, you actually have to look at that world you want to get somewhere in, right? You use that observations about that world in order to predict how it will behave in the future, right? If that's what you mean by reason and evidence, fine, I'm on board. I'm just, these terms, reason and evidence, they are a little sort of fluffy and if you just throw them out there, right? Okay.
You can use the medical sciences to cure or to kill. Figure out how to create antibiotics, or figure out how to poison someone so that no test can find it. Amoral. So these philosophers, this accumulated weight of dead inertia, error, obfuscation, and betrayal of humanity.
Betrayal. Okay, man. Okay. Okay. Well, listen. If you want to do philosophy, you need to start somewhere. You can't just jump in midstream and say, I found a moral principle here, right? If you're a good philosopher, you realize you have to have a starting point somewhere and then build from that, right? Otherwise, it will inevitably end up being just some, quilt of various shit you bring to the table because you need it and leave something out that doesn't fit your picture, right? No, it has to be something that starts somewhere and encompasses everything, basically, right? And in order to make sure that those who read or hear about your philosophy don't feel they're being manipulated, that you are bringing everything, you're opening the doors to everything, right? There's no holes anywhere, anything like that, right? Now, an approach like that means that you have to be fucking strict with your philosophy and start, building and, making sure that you're on track and you might eventually not really get to the end point, which is, as correctly as he states, in my opinion, a moral principle, right? He says morality, but I would say that it should condense into a moral principle, something that is clear cut and easy to handle and easy to understand and so on, right? They might not get caught up in earlier parts of philosophy, and when they eventually get there, it's like just something they say, okay, I have to have something there, and it doesn't really work, right? And I think that might be the reason why it has been downplayed, this morality, as it's hard to get from thinking to doing, right? As David Hume pointed out, you can't just say, this is the case, therefore you should do this, right? Which is basically how people argue for morality if you deconstruct what they're saying, right? Everybody says this. And it's like, okay, I don't care about Hume. They say, yeah, fuck Hume. It's 300 years ago, so fuck him, right? No, he's right. You can't argue that way. Hume didn't say you can't get to any morality, but you can't just say, this is the case, therefore you should do like this, right? You can't argue that way. It's not a philosophical argument. It doesn't work. And lo and behold, when you check out how people argue for whatever morality they have come up with, they are always arguing this way. They're using different terms. They're using various other ways of illuminating you about this. But when you deconstruct it, you end up with a breach of the is-ought gap, right? Or a attempt to jump just over the gap without explaining how the hell they did that, right? So it's getting from thinking to doing is the big problem of morality, I think. And a lot of philosophy grinds itself into the ground there, I think, right?
This is how passionately I feel about this. Betrayal. We make the case. This is the interlude. This is the intermission. Let's go to the lobby and get ourselves a drink. This is the intermission. This is the frustration and horror that I feel midway through this project. And it only gets worse from here in terms of morality. Now, if reason and evidence, to use reason and evidence to construct and validate morality is the purpose of philosophy.
No, you can't do that. You're using philosophy to establish it, right? You can appeal to reasoning and evidence, or using reasoning and using evidence in order to handle whatever moral principle you have come up with. But you can't use evidence to get to a moral principle, right? That's stupid. You can't look at an apple or a tree or a bicycle and say, aha, Now I can get to a moral principle, right? It's a kind of thinking. Ethics is a kind of philosophy. You need to think in order to get to it. And it's likely, I would say, that a moral principle has some kind of reference to reasoning and evidence. But you're not using reason and evidence to get to the moral principle, right? It's like you can look at the ocean to see how you should build a bridge, right? No, it's thinking that leads you to building a bridge, right? It's not the evidence of trees or bricks or water or beavers or whatever that makes you able to build a bridge. It's thinking that leads you to building a bridge, right?
Philosophy. Now, you could say, yes, but God gives us morality. Okay, fine. Let's accept that God gives us morality. Then you are a theologian. You are a priest. You're a bishop. You're a pope. You're a cardinal. You're not a philosopher. You're a theologian. Fine. But philosophers have differentiated themselves from theologians by saying, no, we're the reason and evidence guys, for the most part.
I was just thinking about why the hell he has leaned up against Christianity in the recent years, like 4 or 5 years or whatever, right? Is it because he is alone in, supporting UPB, right? And I don't blame other people for not supporting it, right? That he's saying, I have to have somebody around me that sort of, creates give me a feeling that I have some kind of support. So if he leans up against Christianity, at least there will be a lot of Christians who says, oh yes, it's great philosophy. Oh yeah, man, you're so great, right? It can't stand alone. It doesn't have the backbone to say, I trust my philosophy. So he has to, if there's not enough support from listeners or whatever he would call it, right? Then he have to find some other avenue to get some kind of feeling of support, right? Can't stand alone here, right? Maybe that's why he's, spooning with religion.
And even the Platonists and the supersensual smoke this other reality dudes say, well, it's just higher reason and evidence. The evidence is in the forms. And reason is explicated by the forms. I can't communicate it to you. You can't see them through the evidence of the senses, but it's just a higher form or an alternate form of reason and evidence. There's still reason and evidence, guys. 100%. That's the whole gig. Now, you could say earlier on, natural philosophy was to do with science and so on, but certainly, since Bacon, philosophers have been hived off from scientists. Philosophers and scientists are two different groups. Both use reason and evidence. And there's a philosophy behind the scientific method.
No, you are mistaken there. Philosophers think about what it means to reason and what it means to have evidence. That's philosophy. Reasoning and evidence would then be, you could classify as science, right? You need to have done philosophy in order to do science, right? Science is a subordinate to philosophy. It's not two groups. That is a stupid understanding, in my opinion. Philosophy is the king of everything, right? If you're not doing philosophy, you're basically just farting in the wind, right? You're just floating in midair somewhere, right? You have not thought things through, right? At least you should be treated like that, right? Thinking about what it means to reason and what it means to have evidence, that is philosophy. Then when you have done that, you could potentially go out and do some reason and get some evidence, right? But you're not using that reasoning and evidence in order to get to philosophy, man, right? Holy crap, man, it's stupid.
But philosophy, as a singular discipline, is differentiated from all other reason and evidence disciplines by what? By morality, by virtue. Ethics. Universally preferable behavior. That's the gig, that's the deal.
No, but science is just a spin-off from philosophy, right? Yes, it has grown into a huge thing, right? But it's still a spin-off from philosophy. It's like, yeah, all these things that you can experience empirically, you could go and do that by yourself because you're an empiricist, right? Potentially. So if you work from this principle, go out and do some science, man, right? You don't need me to tell you anymore. I have done the work. I've philosophized. Here is science. Do it, right? Go do it. Now, that people are doing science all by themselves and scientists are educating other scientists, and it has grown into some idea that science is sort of the answer to everything. That's bullshit, right? It's like the stupid cousin who think he owns everything, right? No. You are still a spin-off from the family here, right? That's a bad analogy. I don't know where that came from, but it's still philosophy that is the king, right? There's no science that can go and challenge philosophy. There's no evidence that can challenge philosophy, because philosophy is that which defines what you mean by evidence and what you mean by reasoning, right? Otherwise, where the hell does science come from? If science is going to tell philosophy how to get, for instance, to morality, which is fucking crazy, man, right? And if you think that science can give you morality, you need to be fucking clear on how you get to jump, if that's what you're very likely going to do, jump Hume's Isord gap. You're not just going to throw around words and say, now I've solved Hume's Isord gap, right? That's not going to crack it, mate.
And it has been since the beginning of time. Now, philosophy was more fragmented, right? There was a big philosophy circle, and inside, with some overlaps with natural sciences, medicine, and so on. But these disciplines have all spiraled off to their own disciplines for centuries and centuries and centuries ago. And philosophers always talked about morals, virtue, truth, honor, justice, courage, ethics.
See, again, that just throwing words at you, right? Truth, justice, it's like, okay, I give up, Mr. One-Eyed King, right? Oh, man. I mean, does he really think that he's doing philosophy by shouting these words at people? Right? He's like he's desperately clinging to these words as if they're magic, right? It's like...
Useful philosophers, helpful philosophers like Aristotle. You see, eudaimonia, the good life is the pursuit of moral excellence. Okay, what is that exactly? Courage, virtue, truth, goodness, honor, decency, which is
circular argument, right?
it's like going to...
Yeah, it's like Aristotle says, yeah, you should be virtuous, but how do I get to that? But observe a virtuous person. Yeah, well, but how would I know? Yeah, but something like me, like something that looks like Aristotle, right? So, of course, philosophers are always so perfectly moral, right? So, they will never get to some point where they actually point out, oh my God, I have been actually immoral according to my own principle. I have been immoral all the time. No, they're never going to get there, usually, right?
To a doctor.
So they will have confirmation bias, right? Just like Stefan Molyneux, who has the NAP that he loves very much. And so, of course, his UPB is going to end there, right? He's not going to reject the NAP and get somewhere else, right? So he's a part of the same problem.
And saying, oh, doc, I'm kind of sick. I want to be healthy. And he says, well, medicine is the pursuit of excellence in health. Okay. Is that a to-do list or just some general windbaggery? go to a nutritionist. Oh, you know, it hurts when I digest, and I've got a lot of gas, and I'm overweight, and what should I eat? I don't know what to eat. What should I eat? Because what I want to eat ain't good for me, so what should I eat? And the nutritionist clasps his hand below his chin, looks at you and murmurs, ah, yes, well, you see, the nutritional science is pursuit of excellence in eating. Yeah, I know, that's why I'm here. You want to break that out for me a little there, Einstein? Tell me what to do? But they won't. Not one philosopher.
Maybe they're afraid of ending up making a complete idiot of themselves, just like you did, by presenting something like UPB as the holy grail of philosophy, right? Because getting to a moral principle is sort of final, right? It's this is it. This is basically saying, at least to some people, go and do as I say, right? So your philosophy has to be fucking great, right? Otherwise, you will make a fucking big fool of yourself. And you will even make it less likely that the next philosopher is going to be taken seriously, right? So maybe people are sort of keeping back a bit and saying, I don't know, do I want to go all the way, right? Do I want to say, this is the fucking moral principle? Do it, right? And you know, Stefan Molyneux hasn't done that, right? He has just said, yeah, I created a philosophical format for checking whether or not your moral principle or your moral statement is not invalid, right? That's basically what UPB does. It's so even convoluted. Why not just arrive at some kind of freaking simple, clear-cut moral principle? Do this or don't do this. Whatever the format would end up being, right? No. You have to come up with some kind of statement that UPB then can check whether or not it might be invalid. So basically saying, okay, if UPB can't point out if it is invalid, then it must be valid, right? That's stupid, because if UPB sucks, it might let something that is actually invalid pass through because it sucks, right? Bad philosophy.
Of all that I have studied, not one philosopher has used reason and evidence to explicate philosophy. Not
Explicate? But philosophy is a kind of thinking, right? Can you explicate a kind of thinking using evidence? I'm open for suggestions, right? I just can't connect the dots here, right? I can't. I'll let him go on a rant.
one philosopher. I've done 17 or 18 so far. Not one philosopher has used reason and evidence to build up a system of ethics from first principles. Not one. And that's the...
Have you done it from first principles? Right? UPB is not working from first principles, right? You basically said in the start, don't need to do metaphysics and epistemology or anything like that. And of course, murder is wrong or things like that. So you're just rejecting first principles or any kind of metaphysical reduction base or anything in your UPB, right? So get the fuck out of my face with your demands for how philosophers should work with their philosophy, doing their philosophy, when you don't do it yourself, man, right? That's pathetic.
Entire job. Let's say you have a discipline called bridge building that's lasted for
Okay, so we are at the 9-minute and 14-second mark. Let me see if I can put this into a 6-part series. I wouldn't be surprised. Share, like, and subscribe. Hit the like button and all that. Give me a comment. Let me know what you think. Join the Discord board. Maybe consider donation. links on the board. There are also links to subscribe to our Patreon. Any help is appreciated. And otherwise, have a nice day. See you in the next one.